Hello everyone, this is Venom Geek Media here, and today I'm doing another discussion video, more defending the Empire, because no one else will. I realise these videos aren't necessarily the most popular, but I enjoy them, and this is really what it's about, is, me talking about stuff that I'm interested in, that we tend to have quite good discussions in the comments, so today I'm going to talk about perhaps the most frequently ridiculed element of the Empire in Star Wars, which is the stormtroopers, who on paper are the fighting elite, the cutting edge elite of Palpatine's military machine, who in reality, in all the films, seem to be a bunch of bumbling buffoons. So why is that? Why is there such a discrepancy there from what is said on paper to what we actually see? I'm going to try and explain it and really work it out. And the real thesis of this is what we see is the tip of the iceberg. It's not actually what stormtroopers actually are. So let me get into it. So first, who do they belong to? Are they Imperial Army or are they Imperial Navy? Now, from what I've read and from what I understand, they are an independent force. They are their own fighting force. As though they're actually kind of like the US Marine Corps, which I believe is in many ways, I'm not American, so I don't 100% know, but I understand it to be a semi-detached organization of its own, and it has its own artillery, air force, it has its own ships. Now, that's where the stormtroopers seem to depart from that comparison, because they, as far as I am aware, most, not all, but most stormtrooper units don't have their own vehicles and don't have their own ships or aircraft. So this makes them actually in many ways more like the British Royal Marines, which are in practice, which are attached to which are specifically part of the Royal Navy, and any kind of air support they get, that's from the Fleet Air Arm, which is again part of the Royal Navy, or they'll be, if they're going in armoured transports, that'll be from the Army, or helicopters, Air Force. So the stormtroopers are semi-detached, but they will often will be loaned heavy equipment, but the drivers may well probably Imperial Army or Imperial Navy, whatever it is. So okay, there's that in mind as the organisation, and I think that is kind of important because it does affect how they're used. But critically, let's come back to where do they come from? Well, they come from the clones, the Clone Wars, Clone Army. Now, if you are a Republic officer going in from the Old Republic to the Empire, one of the big things you kind of want to, you like your Clone Army. It's pretty good, and you want to really keep it as close to what it was in the war as you can. You want the great thing about clones is that they were highly trained, highly disciplined soldiers. But then what happens is when Palpatine declares the Empire and he sees the imminent economic recession, post-war recession, coming, he does the whole employment scheme, as I previously mentioned in the TIE Fighter video. He's now going to go around turning the Imperial war machine as a means of hiding unemployment numbers and propping up the economy on a military-industrial complex. Okay, so what does that mean? Well, you're going to have to take on lots of troops. You're not going to get I think ideally what they would like is something very similar to the Grand Army of the Republic, where you have highly trained units. They all have, to a degree, the ability to operate in most environments, and are fairly capable of using a wide variety of weapons and tactics. But then also, you've got to bear in mind that you also need the stormtroopers to be quite big, because they're going to be used as a peacekeeping force. Now, why they are used over Imperial Army it's probably more to do with political stuff. It's because the Imperial Army is probably... I'm doing an Imperial Army specific video. But basically, the Imperial Army may not well be ideologically committed enough to do stuff like arresting political dissidents and so on and so forth. And the Stormtroopers are, because they swear loyalty to Palpatine. And specifically Palpatine, they are under his control. So, when you're enforcing a totalitarian tyranny, you need stuff like the Stormtroopers to actually enforce it, because you can't really trust the regular army to do it. So, with that in mind, you now have a large pool of recruits, and you're going to put them through training relatively quickly. Again, with... So what I would say is the Stormtroopers we see, and know as Stormtroopers, i.e. the guys in the white armour, are really a small fraction of what there actually is. It's worth remembering that essentially a Stormtrooper is a career. You're in there as a career. You're not a conscript or a temporary volunteer, as you might be in the Imperial Army, which is sort of a move on from planetary militias. There is that expectation of developing your skills and specialising and so on and so forth, which is where I get onto my main point, which is that there are really, from what I've been able to piece together, there are 3 main specialisation trees of Stormtroopers, 2 or 3. The first one, which I'll cover, which I'm the most frequently seen, is environmental specialisation. So that's stuff like snow troopers, sand troopers, swamp troopers, so on and so forth. Now you might say, oh, well, you don't need to specialise necessarily, you don't need to do specific training, that's just regular stormtroopers wearing that armour. No, that's not really how that works. If you speak to anyone who's done a stint in the military where they've gone and done Arctic training, jungle training, whatever, there is a whole separate set of skills specific to surviving and operating in those kind of environments, and they are very important skills to be learning. So it's not just about having the armor. Now, whether or not every single snowtrooper you see got that training, I'm not sure. It could well be. I mean, that's the 501st. They almost certainly all did. But I'm just talking more generally. You'd probably have your officers and NCOs and so on and so forth. They'll go off and do that training, and they'll be able to then make sure that the rank and file know the essentials of how to operate safely and properly in the environment. So that's kind of the first thing. The whole thing to bear in mind is that most fighting forces spend most of their time training. And that is, I think, true for as much as it is in Star Wars as it is in real life. The majority of an army's time is spent in training, and you just keep training, and so that essentially combat is just a continuation of the training, is the idea. So that's the first group of specialists. Next group of specialists are weapon specialists. So these are guys with heavy blaster cannons, grenade launchers, this, that, and the other. Again, that's probably something that you can do pretty low level on a unit basis. But it's specific weapon systems. There's other weapon systems that require better support, and that do require everyone else to be kind of tuned into what they're doing, which is where I get to the main form, and perhaps the most important form of stormtroopers, which is the tactical specializations. So my point is that you have the generalized infantry of the stormtroopers, the guys in white, and okay, yeah, they're not that good. They don't really have to be, because you've got these combat specialists that will be coming, these tactical specialists that will be coming in for most engagements. So what are examples of these? So an example would be the sky troopers or jump troopers, whatever they're called, but the guys with jetpacks. Because you can't only have just one guy on a unit basis put on a jetpack, learn how to use his jetpack and, do jetpack stuff while the rest of his squad's on the ground. That's not going to work. He's going to be effectively unsupported. What you need for jetpack troopers is you need people that are on the same page and plugged into that idea of operating together as jump troopers. So you'll actually have a unit of jump troopers rather than an individual jump trooper as part of a mixed squad. Now, you could have larger mixed formations based around that, but the jump troopers themselves, it will be a squad or a platoon or a company of jump troopers will be assigned somewhere, because that is a specific set of tactics that they will understand, and the average shiny, as we'll call them, won't. They won't get what on earth is going on. These guys flying around doing stuff. Now, their officer probably should be knowing what's going on. Or maybe their NCO should know what's going on and know how he should be supporting that platoon of jump troopers. So that's one example. Another example would be incinerator troopers, which recently featured in The Mandalorian. Pictured here are some incinerator troopers I made myself from the Lego Geonosis troopers. I thought the red colour of the armour worked pretty well, and so did the airborne clone trooper helmet. So with this, my point is that you can't just give a guy a flamethrower, put him with some guys who don't know what they're meant to do with him, and just send him in. They're not going to want to. Your regular troopers are not going to want to be anywhere near him, particularly when you consider that they'll have these incineration troopers will have to have flameproof armor, because that will mean they can actually advance into their own fire, which is a pretty effective way of moving forward rather than having to wait for it to go or move around it. So you then need other troopers who are similarly equipped and are going to know how to support these guys who are lugging around these massive great flamethrowers and these tanks of fuel on their back. They're going to need to know how to properly support them and protect them, making sure that they don't get sniped from the back and blow up. And, that are willing to stay pretty close to them and properly support them, unlike your shinies, who are going to just hang completely back from this guy and say, well, he's the one copping all the fire. He's the one who the enemy wants. So we're just going to, stand off because they're all terrified of him and they're just leaving us alone. So it's better to just have a unit of flame troopers in that instance, or incinerator troopers in that instance, rather than having a unit with a flame trooper in it, because he's likely to just be unsupported. Another one I've got here, again, pictured again, are the shock troopers. Now, these guys have really changed a lot with the canon in terms of what they are and aren't. By the time of the Empire, I think they are less of a policing unit for Coruscant. They're less part of that whole Coruscant Guard. I think that moves on to other units. And they are more likely to be spread across the galaxy. Now, they are said to be equipped with heavy blaster cannons and grenades and all that. So what are these guys' job? Well, you could argue that these shock troopers are... So, from what I understand, these guys are different in that they are higher morale, better trained, and they are the ones who are going to be sent in. If the defense is cracking, they're going to be sent in to shore it up with heavy blaster rifles and grenades and everything. Or if the attack is stalling, they're going to push it forward. So they are in more of a supporting role, but they are still, again, they're that separate unit. They're going to have their own tactics and ways of operating. So the reason then that the shinies, as I've calling them, are so bad is because really these are probably, for the most part, stormtroopers who are reasonably new, relatively untrained, low rank. Remember, they will probably have received the most rudimentary training, get the most bang out of their buck. The Empire is going to deploy you pretty swiftly. It wasn't like clone troopers where they had 20 plus years to, well, not 20 years, 10 years to train you, and have you become all these specializations and become very competent soldiers. The Empire needs peacekeepers, it needs soldiers out there right now, and I think as the galactic civil war escalates, that becomes even more the case. So they end up increasingly, the initial training is increasingly poor. There's less charting for specialization, and because of how the rebellion works, bringing in your specialists is very difficult. So really only the top elite units are able to effectively pursue them and engage them. So the 501st on Hoth, because the 501st is a highly trained unit that's able to adapt to most, that has all that training in place. But if they showed up with a regular unit, they may not have done so well, and probably wouldn't have even come close to catching the rebellion. Yeah, so I think that's most of what I want to say. And most of the time when the Empire's on the offensive, you've literally got the stormtroopers you're bringing with you. So again, there's no time, if you haven't brought a company of incinerators or jump troopers with you, there's no time to call them in. The rebellion's going to be gone. And that's very different from when they were fighting the separatists, where you could, where it was a drawn-out engagement on a planet, and you could bring in those combat specialists and have them make the effect. Now it's really up to the first unit that arrives has to make that decisive move, and if it doesn't, well, it's too late. The rebels have gone. It's the whole structure of the Stormtrooper Corps is really the right idea for the wrong war. So, but those are just my thoughts. What are yours? Let me know in the comments below, and I'll see you guys in the next video.